In this training session, we're going to look at heartbeat monitoring, but we're going to focus on monitoring hosts and how we can customize those monitoring settings. So in the management console, we already went over the heartbeat agent configuration dialog, so we're going to skip over that. And we're going to go straight to the groups where we have our hosts configured. And I tried to get a good medley here going of Windows-based hosts, network devices, and also groups that are not being monitored with the heartbeat agent. So let's take a look at the standard scenario of a non-Windows device, so grouped here in network devices. There's 3 hosts in here. We got a switch here, a Linux machine, and a firewall. Let's take a look and click on the properties button here. We can already see here that this is a heartbeat network monitoring only group. So that means we don't have any Windows agents in this group. And let's take a look at the properties. And here again, here's that configuration. So we're just monitoring heartbeat. And what we're looking at are the group settings. So these settings apply to every computer in that group unless they have been overwritten, customized on a per host level. But in any case, any computer that's being added, any host that's being added to this group is going to inherit these settings by default. And there are a few things we can do, and they're all very basic network monitoring settings. So the first one is pinging a host. So that, of course, simply checks to see if that host is actually up and running. It's not a very thorough check, but at least we know the device is online in some capacity. And here you just customize, the ICMP settings, how many packets are we sending, packet size, the required success rate, and the maximum round trip time. Obviously, you want to tweak these settings based on where that host is located. If you have hosts that are connected via a very slow connection, then you can, of course, tweak these settings, or the other way around. If they're all on the local network, then 1400 milliseconds is pretty high, and you probably want to reduce this to something like 200 milliseconds. Somewhere in that area. You can mix computers, you can mix hosts, you could put a Windows agent into that group and force it to be monitored. But in most cases, you're not going to want to do that, but this is an option. Then we have TCP ping. So what that does is you basically checks to see if a specific TCP port is responding. So you would first enable that, hit the edit button, and then pick the port or manually enter the port. So if we have web servers in that group, then we could add this here, and that's going to show up here. We're editing the group, remember, so it's unlikely that all of these have web servers, so we're not going to do that. We're going to remove that again, hit OK, and disable that. The advanced options, just a couple of settings here. First one, only check agent or TCP port if ping is successful. Right, so if all your hosts support ping, then you want to probably check this, because if the host is not responding with a ping, it's very, very unlikely they're going to respond on a port. So this makes sense, and it kind of speeds up the whole monitoring process, especially when we're talking about monitoring, hundreds of hosts. So by default, if a host fails a check, let's say doesn't respond to a ping, 4 packets were sent, nothing is being returned, then that would count as a ping error, and that host would go into the error state. You would see that in the web reports in the status, a history entry is created, and an event log entry will be generated. If this is too strict and you say, well, I kind of want to wait a little bit, I want multiple failures before I really consider that host to be down, then you can increase that number. So again, in this case, 2 failures would have to occur before an error is generated in the event log. And repeat failed host, second attempt. So this is sort of a immediate retry. So the previous check here would actually not change the monitoring flow. If a host fails, everything continues. It's just that it requires 2 failures, 2 rounds of monitoring checks before it goes into the error state. This is actually a seamless and immediate repeat. So it checks a host to see if it's responding, right? It will do a ping on, let's just say, the firewall here. It will check all the hosts that are configured for heartbeat monitoring, and let's say the firewall failed. Well, at the very end, once all the hosts are complete, it will retry all the hosts that failed immediately. And you would never see this in the interface or anything like that. But it can help, if it's just a temporary failure. So it's something that usually is recommended to be on because it does avoid false positives. One setting I didn't go into was the collect ping stats for trending. So by default, if we just ping a host, all we see is a status entry that shows us some of the key facts, meaning that how many, the success rate, response time, and so forth. But if you want to track certain metrics over time, then you can check that box. And that's usually useful for hosts that are in remote networks, on the internet, different subnets and so forth, connected, by some sort of a maybe slightly slower connection. So if you do that, then you'll have a whole report available where you can see the response times over time. And I'll illustrate that. I'll show that in the web reports afterwards. And now let's take a look at the actual individual hosts. So we have a couple of different. So if we click here and click all of these hosts, you can see that all of them have custom heartbeat settings. You can see that right here. And if we click here and do a check status and go, you can also see here that we have 3 X's, meaning that these hosts are customized. There's custom ports configured here, and also SNMP is disabled for all of these hosts. So remember, if SNMP fails to respond to requests from the heartbeat agent, then the heartbeat agent may disable SNMP. And how do you fix that? Well, if you click a host, you will see that it says SNMP is disabled. You can simply click that button, toggle SNMP, hit the save button, and SNMP monitoring should continue. You can also inherit group heartbeat settings again. So if you decide, okay, I actually do not want custom settings, then you can click the host, go to heartbeat settings, and you get sort of that same dialog, very similar dialog that we've seen on the group. And you can click inherit. And now if we refresh that, you'll see that heartbeat settings for this host are inherited from the group. And a check status is going to reveal that the customized X is gone. Let's take a look at another group, the service group. So the service group has full monitoring. Let's take a look at the properties. So dialog looks exactly the same. The only difference is that we're actually managing agents, which means that we can use the remote update to push configurations, deploy agents, restart them, and so forth. But we also can monitor agents here and get notifications if the agent is not running properly. And taking a look at the workstations. So this is actually a group where we're just managing agents. They're not being monitored. So in this particular case, the configuration, whoever set this up decided that workstations should be, we want to manage the agents, but we really don't care whether the agents are running, if the hosts are responding up, if they're turned on or not. And so this has been disabled. And you can see that here, all we have checked here is monitor, manage EventSentry agents, And here we've got everything disabled. And the same goes up here for these Docker groups. It says manage agents only. Let's view the properties, and everything here is grayed out. A useful thing for heartbeat monitoring are maintenance schedules. So if we know that a group or a computer in a group is going to be offline, let's just go back here and go back to the firewall, then we can view the maintenance schedule for this host. And there's, if you look here, active maintenance schedules, that's currently empty. And there's 2 ways we can set maintenance schedules. One is a static one-time schedule. Let's say we know that tomorrow between 8 and 10 a.m. in the morning, the firewall is going to be worked on because it's getting an oil change. So in that case, you will set the regular schedule here. You could say, okay, let's do tomorrow, June 9th. We're going to say 8 to 10 a.m. And we're going to hit add. And then you can see here, start time, end time, very straightforward. Or we know that every Saturday, between 2 and 3 p.m., there is some maintenance going on. We could even restrict it to every second Saturday. So only every second Saturday, we have some maintenance going on. And again, if you refresh this by clicking on the host, you will see the maintenance schedules here, so you don't have to go into the dialog just to see the maintenance schedules. There's also another way to start a maintenance schedule, and that's by clicking the Maintenance Now button. If you click the Maintenance Now button, you don't have to worry about putting in dates and clicking on 15 different controls. You can simply say, okay, I know we're going to do something now. There's a problem with this firewall. Let's just set a maintenance schedule for 1 hour. And if you do that, it will add the maintenance schedule, it will save the configuration, and the firewall is going to be automatically in a maintenance state. While a host is in maintenance mode, it will still be monitored by the Heartbeat agent, but you will not get any sort of event log alerts about the host being down. It would also not affect the uptime reliability report. So if a host is down during a maintenance schedule, it will not affect the uptime. Another interesting option is the set as router functionality. If you have a remote network that you're monitoring, and there is and you're also monitoring the firewall, and you know that all the other hosts are behind that firewall, then you can set a firewall as a router, which means that if the router becomes unavailable, you will not get heartbeat alerts from all the hosts that are behind that firewall. Okay, so if you're monitoring, let's say, a network with 10 hosts and there's a firewall, by default, if you don't, without using this feature, let's say the internet connection goes down or the firewall goes down, then you'll get an alert for every single host on that network, of course. But which is not particularly useful because you kind of know that if the firewall goes down, you won't be able to reach any of the other hosts. So, but by setting this firewall as the router, you automatically suppress all other alerts, and you will see in the status of the web reports, of course, in their failure status, there'll be a description there that says, okay, these hosts are down because the router failed. But as far as alerts are concerned, you'll only get one alert from the firewall. So how does this look like? So let's just say, okay, we have a firewall here. These hosts are all on the same network. So let's take a look and click set router. And there's a couple of ways that you can configure this. So the default obviously is no router. So if you don't want it to be a router anymore, we'll choose this. You can say router for all hosts in this group. So that means, okay, so if the firewall goes down, we will not get alerts for Linux Ubuntu and for Switch Cisco. Or if you don't have your network nicely organized in groups, then you can also say, okay, this is a router for one or more subnets. So if the remote subnet is 192.168.0.0.24, then any host that's going to be in that IP range will not generate an alert if this firewall is unavailable. And you can even specify multiple networks. So if you have 2 of them, you can add a comma. And for example, let's say you have these 2. And now this host is a router for this group. And you can also see how this icon has ever so slightly changed. We're going to change this back to no router. But let's take a quick look at the reporting as well. So here we've got the default dashboard. We actually have a heartbeat history here. There was some activity a day ago. So under features network, we have the heartbeat first, and there's 3. The 4th one is an external website, EventSentry, definitely check it out. But current, of course, shows us the current status of all the monitored hosts. Only monitoring 6, but you can see all the stats here. You can see the stats of each port. Ports monitored, none of them failed. Everything is green, ping round trip time and so forth, uptime, etc., total time, how long a scan took. We can, for example, we can see here that checking that Linux Ubuntu machine, where we're checking basically a number of SNMP counters, took significantly longer than anything else. So this is really helpful. If you're noticing that there are issues with heartbeat monitoring, some hosts are taking too long, then take a look at this column here and figure out, maybe there's some hosts where you're monitoring too many counters and so forth. The summary, of course, will show us a summary, which isn't really that useful, and except if you wanted to see, okay, are there any error stats, for example. And then under the heartbeat, we also have the network quality, and that's what I was talking about earlier. If we go to the heartbeat settings here and we check the collect ping stats for trending, that's going to collect that data that you're seeing here. So we're not actually seeing it because it's always 0 because it's a very fast connection. But we could expand this and see if we can maybe spot something here, but since we're monitoring something on the same host, we're not going to see that. We may see some data about that later, but this is the chart that you would want to look at. Packet loss is going to show up in red here. Yeah, this wraps up the session on how we configure heartbeat monitoring for servers, workstations, network devices, and so forth.